Welcome to another edition of the ATACS Podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are talking about the video game called Sea of Stars. I am your host today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. It is December 8th, 2023. I'm joined today by two fellow Solstice Warriors. We have Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it going, Nate?
Hello, I'm here. I wonder what everyone's element would be if you were a character in Sea of Stars.
Maybe by the end of this podcast we can figure that out. I'll go ahead and claim poison. We also join us. So we have Ryan from New York. How's it going, Ryan?
Pretty good. Is there an eclipse today?
There might be. And yes, we are talking about the game Sea of Stars, which involves eclipses and elements of the sun and the moon and all sorts of other things. And it's a good time, and we're going to get into it. And before we do, I will give the standard warning up front is that this will be a very spoilery podcast. So if you do not wish to hear any spoilers about Sea of Stars, be it gameplay mechanics, story stuff, just anything, it is all on the table. So this is your upfront warning right now. You have been warned. And with that warning out of the way, we'll dive into it. I guess a little bit of table setting. Sea of Stars is developed by Sabotage Studios, or maybe they're just Sabotage, but it's a relatively small indie team. This is their second game. Their first game being The Messenger, which was a side-scrolling action game. Which does have some ties to Sea of Stars. They do take place in the same universe, but Sea of Stars is a very different type of game from The Messenger. It's not made in Japan, I don't think, but it's a JRPG style game, very reminiscent of the 16-bit era of JRPGs specifically. It's very obvious their inspirations here. They are very clearly targeting the Chrono Trigger, Mario RPG, that era of JRPGs. Those two games in particular being, I think, the clearest influences. In some ways, it kind of feels like a mashup of those two games specifically, but we'll get into that as well. And all three of us here are pretty well familiar with this type of game, I would say. Like this is a game a type of game all three of us have a lot of experience. And I think all three of us played The Messenger some as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I did play some of it. I did not finish The Messenger.
Yeah, I played the original game. I think there was at least one expansion, Picnic Panic or something like that. Yeah, I enjoyed The Messenger quite a bit. And also, I think some of the music was like directly pulled from The Messenger, maybe. It seemed like maybe there were at least one theme. Mountain Trail theme, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that'll be a kicking off part is the music here. Because, yeah, that was also where I noticed the connection most strongly is there were two themes in particular. One was Autumn Hills, I think. And the other one, it's like the like autumny forest area, and then the other one was like the glacial peak or whatever the ice area was. Both of those areas were on the Mesa Island, and if I understand correctly with the lore, the Messenger, that's the island the Messenger took place on. But both of those songs, because I really liked the Messenger soundtrack a lot, and I listened to it a fair amount, and both of those zones, when I went into them and the music started, I'm like, oh, okay. This is I don't think they're the exact same songs, but they're like remixes of them. It's very, very identifiable as like Messenger rooted music.
Yeah, it's something where And it's been a while since I played the Messenger, and I didn't look any of this up, but as you mentioned, I mean, I think they made no secret that it's like quote unquote in the same universe. A couple of the soundtracks, I think the dragon who wants to be a caterer is kind of a reference to a dragon that you meet in the Messenger. When the kids like raise up their hands and they like do the thing, that's kind of, I think, a running joke in both games. And I think in the Messenger, one of the levels, this might be a mild spoiler for the Messenger, but warning, like I think one of the levels actually that you're going through, there's a bit of lore that you can read that talks about like the sun and the moon and like I don't know, I can't remember exactly how it plays out, but it talks about maybe like um Solus and Luana, or I don't remember exactly what it says, but it was kind of neat because I was like, oh, I remember this little, it's kind of a side thing. Like it feels like it's like there's some world building in here, although I don't know what the connective tissue is. And then, this game is all about the sun and the moon.
Yeah. I mean, all that said, I think it is definitely like they exist in the same universe and there's stuff there for fans of both games to pick up on, but it is definitely not like important to either game that they are connected.
Yeah,
They're distinct enough.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I just said they are distinct enough.
Yes, that is very true. And I think to me, it's an interesting thing. And I definitely noticed the music connection. That was the main thing I noticed. But most of the other lore, I didn't really pick up on details. But like as Ryan was talking about, I think it's a neat thing there. If you do pick up on it, if you played both games, it's kind of a neat connection point. And I want to say I read somewhere it's like 1,000 or more years apart. So they're pretty far apart in time. But yeah, so for Sea of Stars, I guess we'll start with kind of like some broad general structure things, which probably won't take us that long to get through. But structurally, I'd say it is a fairly standard-ish like 16-bit era JRPG flow. You kind of start off pretty limited in where you can go. You go through some zones. You go from one island to another. I feel like those first two islands you spend quite a bit of time on, going through a lot of places without much ability to kind of veer off course. And then maybe like halfway-ish through the game, you do get some more traversal options. You can bounce. There's a pretty amusing like quote unquote fast travel system where what are those giants called? One of them is literally called Yeet.
Yeah, that's all I remember. Is one of them is named Yeet.
And yeah, I think Punty is the one in the sky.
Okay. Yeah, they're all plays on words for like throwing someone around or punting someone.
They just put you in a big boulder and yeet you across to another continent.
Yes. Which early on, even that's pretty limited in where you can go. But by the end, you can actually get around fairly quickly with those. And then about halfway through, you also get a boat, which is pretty handy. And then right at the end of the game, you can your characters go Super Saiyan and you can fly around. But yeah, your access to the world expands as it goes. And for the first, I would say, gosh, at least until you get the boat, like the game's pretty linear. And then it opens up a little bit, and then right at the end, there's some side quest stuff. I guess overall, I mean, again, it's a pretty standard flow, but were you guys okay with that? Did you want anything a little different, or I guess anything worth discussing here? Is it more just like, yeah, that's the standard flow for this type of game, and it works well enough?
Yeah, it worked for me. I was fine with it because I didn't. A lot of times games of this style will lose me when they start to have so much stuff you can do around the edges throughout the entire game. That can wear on me for sure. So I do appreciate like this game is focused on what you're going to be doing on the main path, and it's snappy and it moves quick, and I like that.
Yeah, I guess for me, and this might be a good segue into. I'll probably keep coming back to this. I'm actually interested in both of your opinions as we go through this, because for me, Sea of Stars was a pretty good game. Like I ended up liking it more towards the end, and some of that is structural, as you mentioned. But I actually found that slightly disappointing at times, and slightly annoying. And I feel like this game has been pretty well received. So I'll be curious, like if you guys land a little bit higher on it than I did. And you know, some of that's expectations, right? The Messenger was quite good, and they were, you know, the team was clearly shooting for like, you know, as you mentioned, inspirations like Chrono Trigger. But I actually feel like in terms of structure, specifically what you're talking about, to me, the game early on was extremely linear, like kind of painfully linear. Like there were times where I was like, man, you know, the world traversal doesn't feel good until you get the boat, or really until you can fly. But the boat helps a little bit. Um, so like some of that world traversal, and like then there's just like kind of nothing to do. Like there's barely even any side quests for like the first half of the game. Um, and so I felt like that was pretty railroaded. Um, and you know, I don't know, it was actually a little dull, to me. I was kind of disappointed because, you know, in terms of the art style and stuff, they clearly take inspiration from games like Chrono Trigger. But one of the things that Chrono Trigger did that was kind of masterful is that it had all these inflection points where you could hit different endings or different branching paths, or, you know, you could recruit like a different character. And Sea of Stars had none of that. Like it was very linear, very flat. Um, so yeah, a combination of like, you know, it being so linear and like not really having some interesting stuff to do along the way, plus like it not really living up to some of its inspirations, like not even remotely. Like I don't, as far as I know, there's like none of that stuff in there.
Yeah, I think I was somewhere a little bit in between for the first half of the game where I think I would have wanted a little bit more side stuff or like additional things to poke into or something interesting to like mix it up a little more. Um, but I think once I realized what the game was, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna head down, just kind of go forward through the path. I think I would have liked to get the boat or something a little more exploratory, like a little sooner. Because there was definitely a stretch like kind of right before the boat where I was like, yeah, this is getting like a little samey, like it is getting kind of starting to feel a little flat, like Ryan was saying. I don't think it bothered me quite as much as it bothered you, Ryan, but I do agree that it could have used a little more in that first half to not be so railroaded and kind of samey. So I'm kind of maybe in between there a little bit. Did you like it more in the back half, Ryan, once you did start getting access to more, like being able to go different places? And I also wish, kind of similar to the boat, I also wish you'd gotten the ability to fly a little sooner, because it was literally like right before the final boss is when you get the ability to fly, and then there's like probably like half a dozen side quests that open up immediately with that ability, and it's like, oh, it would have been kind of nice if some of that had been like sprinkled throughout a little more instead of just kind of like all dumped right at the end. It's like, okay, now go do all the side quests.
Yeah,
That's a thing that games do sometimes that can kind of bug me, when it's like, okay, you can't really do most of the side quests until at the end, and then you have to do them all at once.
exactly. I did enjoy the game a lot more, um, in the back half, because there's an item you can find that will tell you if you've missed things. You know, you unlock all your powers, your grappling hook, your push block, so you know your ability to change the sun and the moon. So you kind of know that no matter where you are, you just really need to find the puzzles or chests or whatever. And then, as you mentioned, there are like half a dozen side quests, and you can do everything. There's like a little side town that opens up somewhere like in the back 2/3 after you're halfway or maybe a little farther. So you can do some stuff to build that up. And then, yeah, the traversal just felt so much better when you could just press a button and like turn into like a little sunball and fly around. Um, I did enjoy, and I did actually go through the like it's like the parrot or something you can unlock that'll tell you you can like ping a location and it'll tell you if you're missing like a treasure or something. So I did some of that, like collecting. Um, yeah, I did enjoy that backstretch more than, and as you mentioned, yeah, it did feel a bit kind of like all stuff together at the end. Like there was very little, other than like fishing holes, there was very little to do off the main path. And I think part of that, and if I want to get into this right in a second, is because there were parts of the combat, like the battle system, that I actually didn't enjoy in Sea of Stars. So I think it made that kind of linear part of the game, especially that front half, just almost like painful because it's like I'm kind of enjoying the story and the exploration's not bad, even if it's a little linear. But then it's like I just wasn't really enjoying the combat outside of the boss fights for like most of the game, and like it's hard to skip when you're first going through an area. And so like that very linear first 50 to 70% of the game is just like, okay, well, I'm getting into all these encounters and like I just really don't like this combat system. And like there aren't so many of them that I just decided to quit the game, but it's like I just feel like I'm having to push through this to like get to the good stuff.
Yeah, I definitely like. I can see what you're saying about like side content being more like available throughout the game and more exploration and stuff. I think that's a totally fair point. It didn't bother me. The thing that I think is a bigger issue is what you were just saying, where like for the most linear parts of the game, it does sometimes get to be like three dungeon like areas back to back to back with a lot of just very standard combat in it. And I generally liked the combat system, but the thing that made me like the game more as it went was getting like new party members and new abilities to make things more dynamic and interesting and more mix-ups available for the combat, because in the early stages it is extremely straightforward and it takes a while to start getting that full roster of characters with all the different abilities and combo attacks and everything that make it more interesting.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing for me with the combat, as well as I did generally like the combat, but there is a stretch. I agree with both of you. Kind of said this. I agree that the first third of the game or so probably was like got pretty repetitive with the combat, and I think for me the main thing I would have wanted was the having more characters earlier on, because I think by the end of the game I really appreciated the differences between all the characters and being able to swap with them or swap between them so freely. So I do think the combat started getting a lot better, but it did feel like it took a little too long. Like you're pretty much just with Valere and Zale, right? And
Yes.
and Garl, you're pretty much just with those three for quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to get more sooner. Before we'll dive into like the nuts and bolts of the combat in a minute. But first question before that is how much side stuff did you guys do? Were you fairly completionist? Did you kind of not do that? Did you find all the Rainbow Conches? Did you what all did you guys do there?
I did all of the side quests. I think each character had like a side quest to get like an ultimate weapon. I think I did all of them, all that I know of. I actually did go back and play the was the mini game called Wheels.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I was going to ask, did anyone else do? So I did all the wheels. Did anyone else do all the
Oh
wheels?
my gosh.
I think I did all of them except you had to. There's like one I think that might have been in an inn in Brisk, the Golden Pelican, and the guy said you need to have a reservation, and I didn't bother looking that up. I was like, I poked around a little bit, and I was like, I don't know. There's probably a side quest that chains into this, and I just don't know where it is. So I don't think I did I guess I didn't
Yeah.
finish those. You have to do that, I guess, to challenge the watchmaker. I did all of them except those two.
Yeah, so there's
Uh,
not, you must have missed one somewhere else because there's not one in the Golden Pelican. Um,
okay,
the Golden
I know.
Pelican is something related to the true ending.
Oh, okay. It told me that I was missing a Wheels champion in Brisk, but I played the one in the Humble Boast, the first one. I
Hmm.
thought the second one was going to be in the Golden Pelican, but I didn't ever find, I guess, where whoever the second Wheels champion. So I didn't do all the wheels. I missed the last two, I guess. I didn't do the true ending. I did 48 conches, I think, which was like the second to last tier. But
Hmm.
it seemed like you were going to basically have to 100% the game to get whatever the final, like all 60 conches. So I was like 48. I have this little radar that lets me ping, and I like to see some of the prizes. I did that. I guess that was about it. So yeah, some of the ultimate weapon side quests, like the second to last uh, conches, and all but a couple of the wheel champions.
Yeah, what about you, Nate?
Yeah, I did less than I think either of you guys. I am just learning that you get rewards from the Rainbow Conches.
Oh
Yeah,
wow!
yeah. There's a person down in the water village, like
Okay,
Dokaria or something,
okay.
who wants those conches, and they give you. I think that's actually how you build out Mirth. Is that what some of the rewards are? It's like here's the
I was
Like
wondering
here's the
why I
three
never
of
pin.
the
found any blueprints.
blueprints.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But I was wondering why
I
I
think
never found any
most.
blueprints.
Yeah, I think that's where most of them come from.
Yeah, I must have just never talked to that person because I just assumed you needed all the conches to do anything. Like I think I
Uh-huh.
found a decent number of them. I have no idea how many I found, but I found a decent number, and I was just like, well, I'm not gonna look these up and find them all. So I'm just
It'd be funny if you basically had all of them and just hoarded them for yourself.
I'm the conch king.
Yes.
Um, I did stumble on like I think all of the like character ultimate weapon quests that you get from just like talking to them at the camp at the end of the game. I didn't really look anything up for this game, but I stumbled into those and did those, all the ones I knew about at least, and then that's pretty much it. I didn't do any wheels. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it is kind of nice that they made those like the ultimate weapons and armor stuff are pretty easy to locate, I guess, because like you said, yeah, you just kind of talk to people in your camp and you can find those. They're not super hidden, I guess.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I did everything.
Yeah.
Um, Wheels was a funny one because the very first time I played Wheels, I lost a bunch and it just felt very random to me. And I spent like maybe an hour messing with it. And then once I won Wheels the first time, I don't think I lost again. I just like blew through all of them. It was like once I kind of got a handle on it, it felt pretty easy and
Right.
pretty quick. So once I realized that, I was like, oh, I'll just every time I encounter it, I'll do it. Um, the only really annoying one was there was one in the what is Sarai's world called? That like other world? Is there a name for that world, or is it just Sarai's world? Um,
I think when you go to the portal, it just straight up says Sarai's World.
Yeah, I think that's all they ever call it.
yeah, there was like a cyborg person down there who wanted to play some wheels. They wanted something fun, but they didn't have a table, so you had to like buy a table from the watchmaker, and then bring it down there. And then I had to go back to the watchmaker to fight her because she's the last wheels champion. You have to play her last. So it was like I had to do like a bunch of back and forth, which was annoying.
Mm,
But
yeah.
um, some quirks like that. But yeah, I did pretty much everything. The bird, the parrot, or whatever that pings stuff for you made that pretty easy. Actually, it was not
Yeah.
that big of a chore to do everything because of that.
Yeah, y'all were talking about that earlier, and I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, I was wondering
Who
if
knows the
if
thing?
anybody had missed it. I figured like it was like the game's one big collectible, so maybe it was kind of obvious.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't even remember where you get that bird, or if it was. I feel like it was something you just got.
It's from the Rainbow Conches, like after 20 or
Uh,
so.
that's why Nate didn't get it.
I'm good at video
When I got
games.
that, because up until that point, that was, we talked about how the game got more open and fun towards the later part. So like at the first part of the game, I skipped a lot of the wheels. I was kind of powering through it, but I didn't really get interested until like a little farther on where the challengers were a lot harder. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to wait till I can go back and challenge some of the easy ones.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, with the Rainbow Conches, I was like, well, I've got 20 or so. I'll turn this in and then I'm not going to worry about it. And then I got the parrot and I was like, oh, this is great. Like, now I don't have to guess which areas have something. I can just look at the map and like it'll tell you, it's like, hey, you've missed a conch. Hey, you've missed a treasure or something.
Yeah. Yeah, Nate, so you're aware what it does. You open the world map and you like click on an island or whatever, and the parrot's just like, Squawk, you missed a conch in Brisk. And so it's just like,
Nice.
it tells you where everything you've missed is. So
Yep.
it makes it actually fairly easy to get everything.
Nice.
Cool. So yeah, I think the next thing we'll dive into is the combat. Is there anything else like structurally or side quest or world flow or anything to mention, or are we ready to just dive into this combat? We've kind of touched on it a little already.
Let's do it.
All right. So yeah, the combat, like I kind of alluded to up top, I think the combat is where the Chrono Trigger and Mario RPG inspiration shows the most. Chrono Trigger style, you see the enemies walking around, and it doesn't even transition to another screen. It's just like you bump into the enemy, and everyone kind of hops into battle formation, and you start going on the turn-based battles, and then and similar to Chrono Trigger, like the positioning in the battles matters. There's a couple of skills that will hit all the areas or all the enemies in like a little area. For example, one of Valaire's initial attacks is like initial skills is like this sweeping attack,
Yeah.
and it'll hit any enemy that's close enough to the one you target. So there is a little bit of like positioning in there, similar to Chrono Trigger. And then the Mario RPG part is, of course, like the timed hits. You press A or whatever equivalent button on whatever your controller you're using, and if you time it right, you'll do extra damage on your attacks. And some of the different skills have different timings that can be trickier than others. And then also on defense, if you press A when you defend, you will take a little less damage. And in some of the bigger battles, that can make a difference if you're hitting those consistently versus not.
Yeah,
And then
it definitely makes a big difference,
Mhm.
especially when the attacks you're using, the timing gives you multiple hits, and then that gives you chances to break element locks more in a turn. That's like the biggest difference that system makes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, the lock system I feel like adds a whole nother layer to that. Which, yeah, just yeah, because you have different skills and different patterns, and some of them can hit multiple times and all this stuff. And you also have combo skills, kind of, pseudo Chrono Trigger style. But yeah, Nate alluded to these locks, and yeah, I think that's the one big new thing that I haven't seen in a game before that Sea of Stars does is whenever enemies are queuing up like one of their special attacks, one of their special skills, there will be these icons above their head that correspond to different weapon types or different elements. And if you can hit the enemy with all of those types of attacks before their turn, you will just outright cancel their attack, which is pretty powerful. So if an enemy has 3 moon icons above them, you need to hit them with 3 moon attacks. But Valaire is really the only one who can do moon, but she does have a skill that the moon meringue that bounces this little moon back and forth. As long as you can keep timing it right, it's like a little ping pong thing. So yeah, things like those, like it's really critical to hit multiple times. I definitely remember I use moon meringue a lot because like there would be some battles where it's like, oh, these 3 enemies all have multiple moon icons on them, and so I want to bounce the boomerang with one skill. If I can time it like 6 times in a row, I'm going to hit all of them enough to cancel all of their attacks, which could be like a huge game changer, the difference between hitting it and not. So that timing can, as Nate said, become very important.
Yeah.
I know I've been kind of talking a lot about all the mechanics here. The one last thing I'll mention is the way MP works, or is it called MP in this game? Or is it just mana maybe?
I don't remember.
MP, because like in the level up screens, it'd be like +1 MP.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so I'll call it MP. It might be called mana now that I'm thinking about it, but either way, y'all know what we're talking about. This is your what you use to cast your magic. So you use, if you use, let's say, 4 MP to use a skill, then your regular attacks will restore your MP. So if I hit an enemy with a regular attack, it might restore like 3 MP or so. So I thought that was an interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say I really like that system. Like, characters have fairly small pools of MP, and skills kind of cost a lot, but then you can freely recharge it just by doing standard attacks. So it ends up being, it feels very strategic and more like I'm actually managing resources than in like what a lot of standard RPGs do, where you just have like 100 MP and you use it slowly over a long period of time, and then use items or resting to refill it. Like, this feels much more like a resource management in a good way.
Yeah, it's a more like short-term resource management cycle compared to like, oh, I need to manage my MP over the course of the entire dungeon type of management.
Right.
So I thought the MP stuff worked well also, and I generally found breaking the locks fun, but that could also, I don't know, when you're fighting the same enemies over and over, like in regular battles, it could slow down a little bit, which I'm guessing, Ryan, that's probably some of the like tedium you were alluding to about like the early parts of the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been said. I'll kind of echo it in some ways. So I did really like the combat in the boss fights.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I dislike the combat system in general, because like you said, especially in the boss fights, you wanted to do the action timings that I actually kind of thought that was cool. You have a lot of times, you have the locks. So, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's my turn order? Like, can I switch people in? Like, you know, um, when you do basic attacks, that generates these orbs, and so you can soak those up to like empower your attacks or add an element to your attacks. So like you said, basic attacking restores your mana and generates these orbs, whereas like consuming the orbs, you also get combo points. So there's just all these little resource systems that they have in there, in addition to the strategy of like the lock breaking. And some bosses have counterattacks, and sometimes the positioning matters. So yeah, in the boss fights, I thought it was usually really interesting, like all these different systems and managing it. I think I think what you were saying, Flex, sometimes the regular encounters were just very slow, but also I think to me the combat systems and the leveling up most remind me of like some of the Mario RPG games. And I suspect that if I were to play some of those games now, I would probably feel the same way. Like, I like the idea of action timings in theory, but after a few battles, they just mean that you kind of have to, like, I don't know, there's a combination of things where it basically means you can never zone out and play it like a turn-based RPG, right? You're always having to do something unless you use the relics or whatever to tell it to ignore that system. You're always having to engage with this, or you're going to lose out on sometimes like 30 or 50 or whatever percent damage, or you're going to miss lock breaks or whatever. And then also like because especially on defense, you're fighting so many different enemies and they have different attacks and the positions and distance all matter. Like I actually found that I'm usually pretty good with timings in games like these, but for the defensive timings, I was just in the regular fights because they were so varied and because the distance sometimes actually matters. I think often it matters. Like the defensive timings just always felt so fiddly to me, which just felt kind of terrible. Um, and then I guess the other thing I will mention, just kind of structurally about the combat, is that, compared to a lot of other modern JRPGs like Bravely Default 2, Octopath Traveler, I'm playing the Star Ocean remake, like they have all these quality of life things because you do a lot of battles, so they'll offer you ways to skip battles or to say, okay, well for this dungeon I just don't want to engage, I'll use like a repel, or in like Bravely Default you can do 4x speed. In Star Ocean you can skip all the long animations just by pressing the skip button. They just have all these things that allow you to kind of like speed past like the long animations like the and and Sea of Stars really didn't have a lot of that quality of life stuff. Like you could try to dodge around the enemy encounters by walking past them, but sometimes that was futile, or sometimes the enemies would be in like these forced encounter spots where you could see them, but you couldn't really do anything about it. Or like if it's your first time through an area, it's like, oh well, I probably need to like figure out where to go or like activate a switch or something. So, all that's going to happen is I'm going to try to run past this enemy and then I'm going to get stuck and it's going to catch me anyway. So it's like just all it just I think the action-based combat by itself would probably get old for me, even if I were to go back and play some of the like Mario RPG style games, but also just all this other stuff of like the game kind of like feeling fiddly, and yeah, like the regular encounters just being kind of like pretty plentiful and kind of slow to engage with compared to some other modern games. And also, just as a side note, I didn't like the leveling up system either. That's also like a Mario RPG thing. I just found it confusing. I was like, okay, I get to choose one of 4 attributes. Like, I don't really know which of these is the best. Like, is there an attack option? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Like, I don't know if it's random. Like, I don't know. It just
Yeah.
felt kind of silly to be able to pick like one stat to upgrade.
Yeah, I didn't care for that system either, and I never felt like I was making an informed like strategic choice. I was just like, I don't know, let's get MP this time. That sounds good.
Yeah, I do remember liking that in Mario RPG, but I think Mario RPG was way more simplified on that, so
Yeah.
it was easier to think of like, oh yeah, I just want more health or more magic. This game, yeah, with having, I think there were like 6 total stats that could upgrade, but you only got 4 of them on any given level up, and I don't know how they determined which 4 you could choose between. I don't know if it was like the 2 that were you had already like buffed up too much, they were excluding. I don't know if it was some kind of system like that or if it was just truly random. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
One weird thing that happened for me, I don't know if this happened for either of you. For the last like 3 or 4 times I leveled up, everyone but Sarai still had 4 options. Sarai only had 3
Huh.
for my
Yeah,
last couple levels, and it was the same 3 every options every time. So something with her character growth was different for me. I don't understand why.
I don't remember specifically if it was Sarai or if it was someone else. It might have been Sarai, but yeah, it was the same. And I don't know if I was like, well, did I cap out these other stats? Because if so, that's cool. It's like I guess the stats are kind of inconsequential. They're just like a shortcut to getting what you want a little faster, even though you don't have control over min maxing that much. But I wasn't sure if that was the case or if it was. That's the thing. I mean, there's probably a guide that lays it out that's like, oh yeah, at the end, if you hit 99, you're going to be max on everything. It won't make a difference. Um, I don't know, but yeah, it was weird. And I also didn't really know the difference between physical and magical attack. Like I wasn't sure if physical attack was just your basic attack or if that included
Right.
like certain types of special attacks. So it's very
Yeah,
confusing.
that was never made clear. I made an assumption that like slashing and blunt damage were physical and everything else was magic, but I don't know if that's actually true.
That was kind of my default assumption as well, but yeah, I don't know if that's true. And then some of the skills were kind of like in between. It was like, oh, this is kind of a physical looking attack, but also kind of magical looking. And also like Rashawn's basic attack, I wasn't sure if that was physical. Like, was he an exception where, because he like throws these vials at people, and I'm like, I don't know if that's physical or magical.
Right.
I don't think I ever selected magic or physical attack for him.
Yeah, I don't think I did either.
Yeah, I think overall, I as we were talking about it, I was like, oh, there are actually more systems in this combat than I thought. Because when we first started talking about it, I'm like, oh, this combat's pretty simple. There's not much here, but yeah, there's also like the combo points and like the little magic orbs that drop that you can absorb, and then there's like an ultimate meter that ends up getting added in at some point. There's actually kind of a surprising amount of things, and each one individually is pretty simple, but
yeah.
And I think in the regular encounters, a lot of them don't really come into play that often, because a lot of them are things that build up over the course of a battle, and normal battles are just so quick. But kind of as Ryan was saying, like, I do think the boss battles is where the combat shines the most, because all of that kind of comes into play. And I did find it pretty satisfying to manage all of that stuff in the boss battles, especially late game once you get multiple characters. And I don't think we've mentioned it, but yeah, you can swap your characters in freely. You always have 3 active ones, but by the end of the game, you have 5 and 6 in the true ending, but normally 5 is where it caps out, and you can swap around them as needed.
Yep. Yeah, I think the boss battles really do show how well all those little systems kind of interlock and work together, because it was almost all the boss fights in the game, I felt like, were like lengthy enough that you could see all these systems like fully engage and cycle through multiple times, and like your ability to manage all the resources and like capitalize on those systems every turn felt meaningful and rewarding to do. And like I would often feel like I was like on the edge of everything collapsing, and then would like make the right play on a turn and just completely turn it around, because all of the different systems kind of clicked into place right when I needed them to, because I had been, making good decisions, and that it felt really good.
And not dropping your inputs too, right?
Right. Well, I'm glad that you said earlier the thing about like the defense timing attacks being difficult, because I just thought I had grown too old and gotten bad at games, because I was like, why can I never defend against attacks in this game?
No, I had trouble with that too. Like I do feel like overall this game was not that hard, but like definitely, especially in the back half of the game, I was missing the defense timings just all the time. Like I did not feel like I did well at those, because Ryan mentioned this earlier. You're running into new types of enemies all the time, and like I feel like I would be almost to the point of getting one enemy type attack down on the defense, and then it would be a new enemy immediately, and I'm like, I'm just never going to get any of these down.
Yep.
The offensive stuff I got down because I had enough time with them, but the defensive timings, after the first like third or so of the game, when they were easier, I was just getting hit by everything. I just had to accept it at one point.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, I do think those boss fights are very satisfying and well done.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, Nate, about it. Like, it often felt like it was teetering on the edge, and then like, oh, you make one big play and then kind of save it. And like, I don't think the game was that hard overall, but it still did like instill that feeling that I think was exciting, and like I felt that way a lot too. And I think they did tune a lot of those systems just so to kind of feel that way. And like, if you did make a couple like suboptimal decisions in a row, it could really cost you.
Yes.
Yeah, like we were talking about the locks. I remember, and they had some different mechanics and different boss fights, but a lot of times it's like it'd be like your guys were bruised, you'd used up some MP, maybe use like disorient to knock the enemy and just turn back a little bit, and it's like, okay, I need to take a turn to heal, and then like the boss would like spin up a big lock attack, and you're like, what's my turn order? Like, can I break all these locks, or am I gonna have to like eat a big attack? It definitely created those moments of tension.
Yeah, for sure. And there were definitely plenty of times where like a big string of locks would pop up and like, there's no way I can. That's just out of the question. But I even found myself like intentionally, because the way the turn orders work is like you have 3 rounds because you have 3 character slots, and if I like, oh, like let's say I have Valere go, then like that slot is locked, like, or like blocked, like I can't use Valere anymore for the rest of this round, basically. So like, but then later on you start encountering these enemies who like can reset their cycle like mid round. It's like they go because most enemies would just go once per round, but then you later on you start, I called them like berserker enemies, because they would just like the second they attacked, they would like queue up another attack. They would just like continuously be attacking. So I'd be like, ooh, if I know this is an enemy type that like is, tends to have locks with moon in them, like I might not want to use Valere first in the round, because I might want to have that option available. Or maybe I cycle her out because the characters that are not active, like they're kind of always available to cycle in and use. So like it definitely gets you thinking about like the order you want to do thing and like how to best manage all that. Like it definitely leans into that kind of thinking, which I found satisfying.
Yeah.
I remember there were a few times because I would usually keep Sarai in reserve because she has an attack that will delay the enemy's turn.
Mm-hmm.
That attack was
And I
so
think,
useful.
yeah, I think the alchemist Resham, I think he has a couple of combos that will do that as well. But I remember there were some times where I used Sarai to attack first, and I'm like, it'll probably be okay. And then, yeah, like you said, the enemy would spin up like some nasty attack with like 2 rounds to go, and I would be like, oh, none of my characters can break all the slots.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing I'll say that I really felt like was limiting at the beginning, but kind of appreciated more towards the end, was like characters don't have a lot of abilities, but they all find their uses throughout the game. Like some are just more useful in more situations than others, like Moonerang or the disorient that you guys were just talking about, where you can delay enemy turns. Like some are just like really, really good more often, but I did feel like they did a good job of characters feeling distinct. They didn't overlap too much, and they had just like a core set of unique abilities that you knew at some point like that ability would be exactly what you needed.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Because yeah, I think that there were a couple abilities that I basically never used, and those were usually like more just pure damaging abilities I tended to not find worth using, but most abilities had some kind of utility, whether it was the Disorient to delay turns, or Rashawn had one that would just break any lock, and if you timed it well, it would break any 2 locks. So if you had like a weird combo of locks you were trying to get through, or it would be something that hits multiple enemies, so you could like do, sun damage to all enemies at once with Zale's like zip around slash. I forget what it was called.
Yeah.
Dash slash.
Yeah. Yep. The one thing I found, the utility I found I always wanted that I never had, was a way to break multiple sun locks on a single target.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just never got a way to do that.
There were some combo attacks where you could.
Yeah, combo attacks. There was a combo Soonrang, which was basically just Moonerang with both sun and moon element.
Yeah.
Yes. I did use that one.
That one's always useful.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there wasn't like a regular skill that could do it.
No. It was just combos, and then Zale's ultimate would just, if you wanted to just be able to do a ton of sun, you could do that, but
drop
his
the
ultimates
sun
are
on
pretty
them.
rare. Yeah, drop the sun on them.
Yeah.
That
The combo,
is a. I was going to say that's a really sweet animation.
yeah, all of the ultimate attack animations were pretty cool. I do wish I could skip them after a certain point because they were kind of long.
Yeah, they were long.
The combo I used by far the most, like probably 90% of the time I consumed combo points was to do the group heal.
Yeah.
I relied on that almost exclusively. Which I guess, by the way, items is something we haven't really talked about, and I simultaneously felt like items were extremely powerful and also rarely used them because that combo team heal was also very powerful.
Yeah, I use that the mending light, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds right.
Yeah, I use that all the time.
Mm-hmm. I don't have too many other things to say about the combat. One thing that I did think about at some point through the game is there were multiple. It felt very common for in dungeons to have a very accessible camp to rest at, and do so wouldn't respawn enemies. So I found myself pretty frequently just being like, oh, I used a big MP spell that battle. Let me just walk back to this one room back and rest at the camp and just get that back. So I almost like, if they were going to have those so readily accessible, I almost wish it would just be a situation of like, make the battles a little more draining on resources and then just automatically heal you at the end of a battle if it's that easy to run back to the fire anyway. Like, just go ahead and heal you up.
I agree. I think it's silly, especially with like what we've talked about, where a lot of the systems are kind of designed for that like short-term resource management, and like if you want to, you can kind of just like be a little bit smart with things and mostly like come out full strength anyway from a battle. And then putting those campsites everywhere where you can just get a free heal with no penalty is a little goofy.
Yeah, I think echoing like I thought the cooking system was kind of interesting, but I never used food. I rarely used it outside of battles because, like you said, healing at camps was so readily available, and then I rarely used it. I never used it inside of battles because I always felt like, if I didn't have a healing spell or mending light up, like things were probably already kind of like uh pretty terrible. Like, I was probably like losing characters and losing rounds at that point, and that's hard to recover from anyway. Um, so yeah, I guess I similarly never really found a situation where it was like, and I probably was a little conservative or just forgot about the items more than I should. But even in some of the tougher fights, it's like, using up an entire character turn for like a food item, a lot of times your skills are just so useful. It's like, and you need to break locks and you need to delay your enemy's turns, and like you need to rebuild your MP. Like, you just spending time using healing items didn't feel like a good investment.
Yeah, I treated them the same way, except for late in the game. There is I forget what that item slot's called. You have your weapon, your armor, then you have your two accessories, and then there's like a party accessory. It's like something that affects everyone.
Yeah, I forget what it's called too, but I know which one you're talking about, where it gives you like a free item use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there's one of those types of items that you can equip that makes using an item not take your turn. And when I got that, I did start using items a little more.
Yeah.
But until then, I agree with what you were saying, Ryan, that it never felt worth the whole, like, it felt like if I was spending a whole turn on an item, that didn't feel good.
That is funny. I remember that item, but I still never used items. That was one of those bad habits, bad gamer habits, I guess.
I still didn't use items much except for the last couple fights, especially the true ending final boss fight. I did use items more, but it was really only the last couple fights in the game where I, even with that free item use equipment piece, I still didn't use items all that much.
You're gonna have to tell me about this true ending, because I actually Didn't
Oh
even
man.
realize it was a thing.
Yep,
Oh,
we'll get there.
oh man.
All right.
Um,
It sounds like Nate is in the know. I didn't even. I mean, I'm not surprised that a game like this would have a second ending, but like
Yeah.
I didn't really see any strong indications, and like we talked about it. I enjoyed it at the back half, but I was kind of like, okay, I'll just roll
Yeah.
it through, be done, be happy.
Maybe we should move on to talking about story.
yeah. One last question. I think this should be a quick question. Is did
Yeah.
you? I mean, you can use every character in combat, so it encourages you to use all of them. But did you feel like you had a favorite or an MVP?
Oh, Rashawn, for sure.
What was it about Rashawn?
His basic attack could hit every enemy on the field, which is already amazing.
Yep.
And then yeah, he had some good abilities. I feel like I don't
He
know that
had
I'll
a.
remember them all off the top of my head, but
He was the only one with a party heal skill,
yes, he had a
and
group heal, and he could break
any
um
two locks.
like a troublesome pair of locks that you had with that one skill, and then his ultimate was like a reset if you got into trouble.
Yeah, I think it heals your party, damages all the enemies, and delays them,
Yeah,
which
I
was just
don't.
kind of like I was like, I kind of like the other animations, like the Zale and Valair and everything, but
Hmm.
it felt like his just did so much more.
Yeah,
Yeah, his was my favorite ultimate for sure because I didn't even notice the delaying the enemies, but even just dealing damage plus healing the party is already really powerful.
yeah, and it would even revive party members if they were knocked down. Like it's
Yeah,
just so good.
yeah,
I did not realize that either.
yeah. I don't know that I've ever had that happen. um, yeah, no, he's definitely very good. I think for me it's between him and Sarai mainly because of that
Yeah,
disorient move I found very powerful. She was also my
yeah,
best physical attacker, I think. Her
yeah,
basic attack dealt a lot of damage.
yeah. She did deal a lot of damage just basically, and then she had that one good poison dagger throwing one. If you had a lot of poison locks on the field, she could just obliterate them all. And
Yeah,
then disorient is great.
yeah. Um,
Yeah. I I I I think Zale and Valair, I usually would keep them in because they were just good all arounders, and then a lot of
Mhm.
times I would rotate the third slot. Sarai was probably my most common in the third slot. Side note about the combat. There's an item you get at the beginning of the game. It's like the leeching thorn or something that lets your basic attacks restore HP.
Yep.
And in some of the dweller battles, like sun and moon damage deal like these inflated numbers
Uh-huh.
to like the dwellers. So I had Valera equipped with that, and so sometimes in those battles, like she would take a big hit, and then she would absorb the live mana and get the moon element added to her basic attack, and then just like hit the enemy for like 500 damage and
Yep.
heal a
yeah,
bunch. That was a
Just
pretty
fully
neat
heal,
little.
yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, that was a
Well,
very nice piece of gear.
never have to heal her in these fights.
Yep. Yeah, I think I had it on Valier the whole game too. It's very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, last topic I was going to bring up another brief one, and then we'll tackle story for the rest of the time is just the kind of look and sound of the game. I like the visual style of this game, and I enjoyed that it was very colorful, as colorful as it was. And I did also really enjoy the music. I like the music for The Messenger as well, as I mentioned before. And I like the soundtrack a lot for this game too. Even when it wasn't echoing The Messenger, like all of its original themes, I thought were really good too. And I thought they did a good job of like the different types of themes you usually think of for these types of games. Like it had good town themes, it had good like traversal themes, had good. I generally like the combat themes as well. I thought across the board, this game just I don't really have anything like super specific to say. Just in general, I did really like the look and sound of this game.
I mean, singing mushrooms, right?
Mhm.
What else is there? What else is there to say? Um, I
Yeah.
I
What?
found this. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. What was? Do you remember these, Nate? We were joking about this a little bit beforehand, but there was one
Yeah.
area where there's like mushrooms in like a swamp or forest area, and they like sing along with. There's like a vocal part in the music, and about halfway through that area, I realized whenever the vocal part kicks in, the mushrooms are like animated singing.
Yeah, I don't think I caught on to that, but I believe it. That sounds like something this game would do.
Hmm.
That was probably my favorite part of like the soundtrack is whenever I was going through like the singing march or whatever. And like you said, it's like when the vocal part kicks in, you look up and like all the mushrooms are just like just belting.
Hmm.
um, yeah, I did find sometimes the little 8-way art was hard to read. Like sometimes it was hard to tell what you could and couldn't interact with. But yeah, I think the some of the boss animations and the combat, like the ultimates, were just really well done. Um, and I enjoyed some of those.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's nothing else other than story stuff, I think it's time to tackle all of that. I don't think we need to go through this game beat by beat by any means, but I guess I'll start with maybe a good first question is like how did you all like the characters kind of and their character development? Like I would say this story is a fairly like character focused story. So did like the main cast characters, did you generally speaking, did you like them overall? You know, I think the thing I'll say up front is I thought Valere and Zale were both kind of kind of bland, but the rest of the cast I did really like a lot. I think they're more of just like they weren't silent protagonists, but they kind of felt like in that classic mold of like your main protagonist who doesn't really have much input, and I thought they were kind of boring, but I think the rest of the cast around them I thought was generally pretty good, and I didn't love everyone to the same degree, but um, before I dive into any more specifics, I want to give both of you a chance to kind of weigh in.
Yeah, I like the characters. I certainly don't think it rises to like the height of RPG cast across all video games or anything like that, but um, I think they were pretty strong overall. They had a lot of good chemistry between the characters, a lot of good banter, and like they did a good job of personalizing them and making them just constantly interacting and showing their individual personalities or way of thinking about things. Garl's always the optimist, happy-go-lucky guy, and um, Zale and Valera are very serious and mission-oriented, as they've been trained to be. And Sarai, I don't even know, like she's goofy in a lot of ways, even though I don't
I
know she's
have
always intended to be goofy.
I have mixed feelings about the whole pirate crew thing, but
Yeah, the pirate crew is a
that
little.
also I think is where they try to insert some of the RPG self-reference jokes, kind of
Oh
like the
yeah, that
messenger.
did not work for me at all.
No, it worked well in the messenger, but I think they tried to do a little bit of the same, and I was kind of like, eh,
Yeah.
this feels like a different game anyway. Like having a character who's just, although there is one specific joke that I think Yolanda is the character who makes all those jokes. She makes a comment like, "You look like your mentor turned out to be the villain,"
Hmm.
and it was right after like that's basically what happened. That was genuinely pretty funny.
Yeah. The
Uh,
other the other thing that I actually think I laughed out loud about was, so the first time you meet Sarai, she's pretending to be a pirate captain, but she's got some ulterior motive, and they like very obviously have her like walking off screen to change clothes, pretending like people don't realize that these two people are the same character. Um, and it's really stupid, and it was like not actually that funny, but it was stupid enough that I thought it was kind of amusing. But then when they reveal that, and you get like an achievement for like, oh, this dumb reveal that you knew was coming. But then like way later in the game, they do like the second dumb reveal for Sarai's character that she's actually a cyborg, and they do this like
Yeah.
the same gag again, and that for some reason killed me.
Yeah. They do have a lot of
I,
different gags, and sometimes they land, sometimes they don't.
yes, yes,
I do think I think Flex, you mentioned you thought Zale and Valair were a little bland, and I could see that. Although I do appreciate that they kind of, especially at the beginning, kept it pretty grounded because it is a pretty fantastic story in some ways about like time manipulation and kind of these eclipse
yeah,
powers handling the sun and the moon. But at the outset of the journey, Zell and Valair, they're special, right? They're the Solstice Warriors, but they're also kind of like two kids who like go get into trouble and like
yeah.
end up stuck at this academy. And I like their chemistry. I don't know if they're brother and
Hmm.
sisters, but or they kind of act like they're siblings or good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they are actually brother sister, but they do have that dynamic.
Yeah, they have that dynamic, and they're like, this is something that doesn't really matter, but I thought was kind of interesting, I guess. Is like they're not like they're not people like everybody else in the world, right? They're not like born. They don't have parents. Like, doesn't some
They're
like
like
eagle
literally
drop them
delivered,
off in yeah, they like
the
delivered from
Solstice
the
twins.
cosmos and
Hmm.
like destined to have like uh a fight like a role to play in this grand conflict. So like they're actually like completely separated from the normal citizenry of the world in kind of a weird way. Um, I don't know that I
Yeah,
have much more to say about that, but I thought it was kind of interesting.
that
Hmm.
is an odd twist. They don't really explore that much, but you're
No,
right
they
that
don't ever really.
they don't have obvious. And it makes some more sense for like Zale and Valair because they basically ascend into these guardian gods.
Right.
Uh, so they kind of become like, maybe not human, but yeah, for
But
the
for the
other
like,
Solstice
generations of
Warriors,
Solstice warriors before them who all got killed, like
do they have
it
families?
doesn't seem like
um,
it.
Yeah. No, I think that's just a Solstice Warrior thing. They're all delivered by that great eagle or whatever it was, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
they don't have like they're born into this life that is very different from other people. And we probably shouldn't get into this yet, but I thought that was like Valer and Zale kind of fell into the JRPG stereotypes of like we got to
Hmm.
keep going and save the world, like yeah,
Hmm.
like that kind of like super determined, positive, like we're gonna save the world vibe. But to me actually, I think the most interesting characters in this game were the other Solstice Warriors were Brugaves
or
and Erlina.
Hmm.
Because they seemed really burdened by all of that, and granted they had different experiences and like seeing things go wrong, but like you almost get the sense that they would have enjoyed life more if they had been like regular people with like
Right.
families and attachments and like weren't bound to this duty in this way.
Yeah. And I wonder, and I suspect part of the like thesis of this game, if you could get into the brains of the writers, is like Garl is like actually the central character of this
Oh,
story, and like
Garl is absolutely the main character.
the reason that Zale and Valair were able to, keep the good fight in their head and like see it through to the end and actually like persevere in the face of everything was because they had that like grounding through Garl and their friendship. Where
yeah,
Yeah.
I think
where Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, I think it is interesting. I kind of like how, they made Garl such a sort of central character, even though he was he was not special, right? He was not a solstice warrior. He's kind of like a local chubby kid with like a sense of adventure or whatever, but like, he was always kind of like the optimist and always like considerate of his friends, and like they kind of have like a close friendship. So I like how they kind of, and they ended up making his character special, like in some of his accomplishments, in trying to support the sort of the solstice warriors, um,
Yep.
as the quote unquote warrior cook, the
Yes.
self-titled warrior cook. Um, yeah, I thought they did a great job like writing his character, and that kind of gets back to what I said, where I like both with Zale and Valair, but I think Garl also fits that very well, and that they're kind of like a group of local kids, right?
Yes.
At least, Zale and Valair are trained for this responsibility, and they're willing to accept it. And Garl's just kind of like, well, I want to go on an adventure, and I like you guys, and like I'm going to support you.
Right.
And they kind of keep the story very grounded in light of the sort of the grim happenings, or and some of the powerful magics and all that.
Yep.
Yeah, there's kind of some messed up stuff that happens in this game. But yeah, the having that like childhood friend group with Valair, Zale, and Garl is a fairly common story setup for this type of game, but I do think it works well here, and they use it well, and I definitely agree that Garl is kind of the central character. And I hadn't really thought about exactly the terms you mentioned earlier, Nate, of like, oh, maybe Valair and Zale were able to keep it together because of Garl. Maybe he was the piece that the previous generation was missing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree with what both of you said, that I think I think it works overall, and I did like the dynamic with those three characters, and I did get a little tired sometimes of like the way they built up Garl to just be like this perfect
Yeah.
little nugget of a human.
He's a little much.
It's a little much. It's like, okay, guys, yeah, I get it. You really have fond memories of that time where he left you cookies on the elevator. Like, we don't have to hit it on the head over, like that one happy memory you go back to. But I still think it overall worked well with what they were going for.
Yes, yeah. I would not change it. But yeah, there are definitely some moments in there where like, okay, you're laying it on a little thick. Like, maybe he doesn't need to be the shining example of humanity in every single second that he's on screen.
Yes. Even the headmaster, who's just like this hard-nosed guy, is like, Garl wins over everyone. It's just like, by the end of the game, everyone's just like, yeah, Garl's the best.
Yeah, exactly.
I did think it was really funny where you do the you go visit the council, and he's like, he wants to like bake the volcano bread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like they're gonna wake the sleeper, and they're worried. They're like, how will you keep him from like rampaging and destroying the world? And he's like, come on. He's like, who can be mad at waking up to the scent of freshly baked bread? And they're just like, yeah. They're like, we can't argue with that.
Yeah, you got a point, guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that is handled with like we kind of talked about like the goofiness, like with Sarai's bit and the pirates, and but even the main cast are often handled with like a really light tone, which is also in line with like the games of the 16-bit era. Like they often were like kind of that very lighthearted, goofy tone.
Yeah,
almost comic booky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or cartoon like maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, what about the other primary party members? Did you guys like them? Sarai, Rashawn, and I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. Bist?
Yeah,
It's like
I guess it's Bist. Yeah.
We'll just call him Bist. Did you like those characters as well? Or I liked them for the most part. I mean, Rashawn obviously had like really outsized story implications, which
Hmm.
I actually thought I started having later in the game with Rashawn is like, oh, this is how they like any contrived thing they need to do, they just do it through Rashawn because he has
Yes.
magic powers. So like, but he also like has boundaries for himself where he's like, no, I can't do this because this was the agreement I had with what was the
Yeah.
Fleshmancer's actual name? Like
Aforal?
Aforal? Yeah, Aforal.
yeah. So it's like they had to have this like gentleman's agreement on certain certain things. So it's like, oh, when the game wanted to like just hand wave something away, they'd be like, oh, Rashawn can do that. But then when they didn't want to hand wave something
Hmm.
away, the way they would explain it would be like, oh yeah, he agreed with a 4-year-old to not do that. So it was like
Yeah.
he was a very convenient plot device.
Yes, very much so.
But I still overall liked him, and I definitely liked Soraya a lot, even with her goofy bit. I thought her story of like her world, because like her world had been completely
Yeah.
decimated by a dweller. So I thought that was a good arc to have late in the game to like kind of drive home like how threatening the dwellers really were.
Right.
So I thought all of that worked, and Bist kind of tied into that a little bit as well, coming from that world.
Yeah, I definitely felt like this came in so late into the game that I never really got an attachment to them. In the same way, all the other characters I felt like I had a pretty good read on and like understood a lot about their motivations and how they thought about the world, and just didn't really ever click for me with this. It was a cool design though.
Yeah. No, I kind of agree with that as well. Um, so as far as narrative stuff goes in general, yeah, we don't need to go through beats, but I mean, I guess
We
just kind
kind
of
of have
open
to
it up.
talk about the big event, right?
Sure, yeah,
Like,
we just want to go there. Yeah, I'm basically opening it up to whatever we want to talk about narratively, but yeah, the I guess that's as good a place to start as any is yeah, like Garl is kind of portrayed as the central character in this
yeah,
game, and I assume this is what you're talking about is they
yeah,
have their big character death moment with Garl. Do you want to talk about that, Nate?
yeah. I mean, it's not like these kinds of games are strangers to killing like a major party member character, and it wasn't like shocking to me. But I still thought it was super well handled. They did it in a really cool way. Like there was this, climactic encounter. Garl steps out of line. I think is how it happens, and then he gets got, but it's like a delay, or he gets like borrowed time or something. Some kind of Reshan magic happens. I don't remember the details.
Yeah.
Um,
It's one of the many Rashawn hand waves.
yes.
Yeah. And I want to clarify one thing real quick. You said steps out of line. He stepped in front of Valere and Zale to intercept a shot that was going to them.
Okay, that's what it was.
So
Okay.
it was like a self-sacrificial to save his
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so like then you have a sequence of him and everyone else like knowing that he's going to die, and they like trying to like make the next stage of what they need to do to try to save the world happen. And he is like adamant that he's a part of that, and he's gonna help his friends get where they need to go. And he does it, and then he dies, and there's like a beautiful funeral scene. And like they really, like, for as fast paced as this game is in terms of like moving the plot forward and moving from area to area, like that's the one spot in this game where they are like really willing to like slow down and sit with it. And that really, really worked.
Yeah, that's a good point that um, I meant to mention earlier, but didn't in the structure that this game like really moves. Like you
Hmm.
really are like it's funneling you through the story and the areas and everything like pretty quickly, like which is normal for games of the era that this is trying to emulate. But modern games tend to move a lot slower. But yeah, that's a good point that for the Garl sequence they did really slow it down. So that had an impact. And I also agree that like I pretty much saw it coming that he was going to die. Like his character had been so many times throughout the game he was just throwing himself in harm's way for his friends. So like he was really setting him up as a like heroic sacrifice type of character that like I could have guessed that was coming, but I agree that like it was still well done enough that it landed.
Yeah.
I think that happened also, and I agree that was a pretty big moment. I think it also happened not long after the betrayal by Erlina and
Yeah,
Burgraves,
I think so.
which was another, not quite as poignant, but it was still a pretty big plot moment because I think that was the first time you were going to fight a dweller, and they had implied that it was like one of the last like two in the world or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so you actually go have a battle with Erlina and Burgraves as like allies. There was some rumblings that maybe they were dissatisfied and that, but you go through the battle and you do the battle and that like they're with you, like, and the headmaster, and you're all working as a team. And then I think you defeat it, the dweller, and like before you destroy its core, that's when they like betray you.
Yep.
And then shortly after that, I think you try to carry on the fight, and I think that's when things kind of go downhill. And Garl, I think Sarai yoinks a vial of time and throws it at the dweller, and that causes the Fleshmancer to show up because he's like, "Hey,
right,
hey, alchemist guy, you broke our contract."
That's right. Yeah. I remember that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which brings us. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I guess that was another sort of, I feel like, big moment before, and then the Garl sequence, and then I guess I'll mention it. You had talked about it earlier as part of Sarai's character, like after Garl passes away and you go through the Sea of Stars, like that's when she reveals that she's actually a cyborg, which I thought that was a pretty cool moment for her character because until then it was just such a weird thing, right? You have this assassin, which is kind of a tropey thing already, right? But she can teleport, which is kind of cool, I guess. I don't know. And, the enemies 1, 2, 3, and 4 seem to recognize something about her. But then, like, she dresses as a pirate and runs around with fire. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. This is so weird. But then, she reveals that not only is she a cyborg or an assassin, but she's also a cyborg. But she does this sequence where she takes off her mask and she has nothing, she has like a Terminator face or whatever, and she's like, "Welcome to my world." I thought that was actually a cool moment for her character and like kind of setting up that world.
Yeah, and
after
go ahead.
Oh, just following kind of the Garl sequence.
Yeah, and I think that was a good way to pivot for like the last chunk of the game because that I forget which dweller it was that you were just describing. But yeah, like a lot of the game was building up to that because that was the last dweller. So it was like, oh, if we get rid of this one, we're kind of done. And then you have that epic fight, you have the betrayal, then you have Garl's death, and like you kind of have all this like super pivotal stuff, and you've kind of been to most of the world at that point as well. So then, I thought that was a kind of a good pivot of like, okay, now we're going into Sarai's world, and you have Sarai's reveal and exploring what that world's about after having basically done everything on the other world. And it kind of gave a different tone and a different vibe to that last little stretch that I think worked well in the wake of Garl's death of like, Garl has died. We're also seeing this world that has kind of succumbed to the dwellers, and it was like an appropriate tonal shift, I think.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job, even though Zale and Valair are not like the most like interesting personalities. They still do a good job of like showing them continue to like struggle with all the loss that they've had, and like how that affects them and their relationship, and like they use that to like strengthen themselves and each other in a, like a really believable and endearing way. Like I felt like I watched them like grow as a team and as individuals because of the events that happened. It was like all very clear and well laid out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think they do a good job in general of like, because as we mentioned before, so much of this game is very goofy, and you have a lot of very goofy characters. Like, there's a lot of side characters we're not talking about, but they are all. There's just a lot of weirdos in this world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in these grounded moments, they do a good job of what you said of like showing how hard the solstice life is, I guess, and like how much loss they have to endure, and like we do get to see some growth. Like, even though they're not the most elaborate characters around, like there is something there. And I guess I'll pivot here to like, I guess the main story beat I wanted to touch on, other than the true ending, I guess, which is the the story of like Brugaves, I guess how you pronounce that, and Erlina, because they're like, you know, a generation older than Valair and Zale. They're other solstice warriors, and like early in the game, I thought it was actually interesting to kind of have them as like mentor characters in a way, because like I feel like a lot of times in these types of JRPGs, it's usually like you don't have that.
Yeah,
it's just your ragtag group of young adults or teens or whatever, like scraping their way through. But like you actually had some genuine mentor characters here. But you do get the sense pretty early on that they're not necessarily thrilled about the solstice warrior life. And at some point, I forget when, at some point you get a flashback of when they fought the Dweller of Strife, and you get the headmaster like crawling back to the town. He's like barely alive, and like so many of them were lost, and like it does do a good job of drilling home that loss. But clearly Brugaves and Erlina felt that pretty heavily, and it weighed on them. And yeah, they, builds up to their betrayal. They want it out. And I'm curious what your takes on this are. Like, I still don't really buy, like, I get that they don't like the Solstice Warrior life and they want it out, but I'm not sure how what they did really accomplished that. Like, Brugaves was maybe made a little more sense. He's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like forget all of this ever happened, and like kind of get all that trauma removed from him magically. But like, they were fighting the last Dweller, like they were basically almost done as it was, and then they were made this deal with the devil, so to speak, to like throw the world back into more chaos. And what Erlina got out of it was like servitude as Aforal's like lieutenant. So like she wasn't really getting out of anything. And
yeah,
I mean, the best read I could make on that was she was doing it to protect Brugaves. Like she was doing like a sacrificial thing. But like, I don't know, the whole betrayal for them, it feels like it got like 80% there towards making sense, but it like still is a little fuzzy for me. Of like, it doesn't seem like, for what they wanted, it doesn't seem like the moves they made fully made sense to me. And I'm curious what your takes are on that.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think it sort of made sense. I think like deal with the devil is the right phrase for that, right? Like they probably got like made the right offer for them and their mental state at that moment that would like work for them, and then they just latched onto that and like went past the point of no return, and then like what else are you gonna do at that point, you know? So I think that's probably the easiest way for me to understand it, but I don't necessarily think that the game makes it a compelling argument that they understood what was going to happen and what the consequences of their actions were going to be. So like, yeah, I think the best read of it for me is like they were tragically corrupted by somebody with way more power than they could comprehend or like understand, and were manipulated by that in a way that was like just whatever they needed to hear to get them to do what he wanted was what was going to happen, you know?
Fair, yeah. And I guess maybe if that's the case, I would have liked for them to show it a little bit more.
Right.
And
I agree.
I think to some extent, maybe that is the whole thing I want here, is just a little more exposition around their mental state, because we mostly just get brief allusions to it, and they kind of explain it a little bit in that pivotal moment, but it never quite felt satisfying enough for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I wonder about that because I agree with you, especially since it was like either the last or second to last dweller. I think even like Zale and Valaire are like, "What are you doing?" Like, if we end it here, like it's over, right? Like, what's your excuse? Um, that part I think does poke holes. Like, you do get the sense that, like as you said, they're clearly tired of the Solstice Warrior life. I think, as you mentioned in the flashback, there was somebody they looked up to, maybe the current headmaster of the Solstice Warriors. They're like, is she going to come back soon? And, they thought it would be a regular mission, and then they all got wiped out. And then there was a bit of, I think, bad blood between them and Moraine. I think he carried the torch, but he was like pretty harsh about it. I think they allude to the fact that he was kind of burdened about what happened after he saw all of them die, and then kind of just came crawling back. Uh, so I think a lot of times they would complain, and he would just tell them to shut up and fall in line. Um, but yeah, the fact that it was like basically the last dweller kind of pokes holes in the whole, you know, it's like we could just finish this job and then retire, but instead we're going to like sell out and lose our humanity, like literally. They get transformed into monsters and like forget everything about who they are. It just doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, and even if they were so done, because they did make some line. One of them, I think Erlina said something like, "Oh, there's going to be more stuff in the future, even if this is the last one for now, or whatever." But it's like, I feel like they could also just like voluntarily retire and be like, "Yeah, we're not doing this anymore," and like get out of the game without causing harm, if that makes sense.
Right.
And maybe there was an aspect of they were promised of like, with Brugaves and the memory being wiped, of like, oh, they just were so mentally traumatized that they needed like a magical fix to cure that. But yeah, I think I just needed a little something extra there to make their motivations make full sense. It's like I can kind of piece it together in a way, but um, yeah, and as you were talking, Ryan, it did make me think. Like, I think there could have been a little bit more exposition around how all of that happened as well. Because yeah, like so many of the Solstice warriors got wiped out in that battle with the Dweller of Strife, and like it clearly caused so much trauma for everyone. And like Moraine kind of had to take up the torch. It kind of fell to him by default, and it really strikes me that he was not really the right person for the job, and he didn't really do a great job with Brugaves and Erlina. And it's like there's a lot of tragedy in that I think could have potentially been like explored more, and there could have been some interesting story beats there.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting that like after that betrayal happens and everything, he's just like I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he suffered a lot of trauma from the earlier battle with the Dweller of Strife, and then once like things went bad again, it's just like he couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, he just completely broke and just said, "Well, I'm just gonna live in this little town, and if the world ends around me, then so be it."
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess is there any other narrative stuff, any other characters, any other story beats? Kind of open the floor to whatever before we talk about the endings. Or do we just want to jump right to the endings?
I would say maybe two small things that come to mind. I like Teeks. She was a fun character.
Yeah.
And I thought in Sarai's world where they've blocked the sun out with clouds and they've buried the moon in the ocean. Those were kind of cool sequences where you're trying to like, you know, you're trying to shut down the machine that's like generating clouds to block out the sun, and then you like go into the abyss, like to get the moon out. Which is kind of neat. I think it's the Dweller of Woe that's down there. You go beat him, and then there's just like the moon sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, that is all pretty cool, like supernatural, mystical stuff. Like everything has become so much larger than life at that point, and those are cool representations of that.
Yeah, I think this game does a pretty good job of like just all the imagery and like the stuff you do, like because you go all over the world and there's a lot of just kind of larger than life mechanisms in this world, I guess. And I think all that works out pretty well. Yeah, well, if there's nothing else, I'll just go ahead and straight up ask, like, what do you? Neither of you got the true ending. I know, Nate, you watched it after the fact, but like of the initial, the initial ending that everyone gets, like, what did you guys think of the way that wrapped up?
I thought the ending was weird.
Also, I agree, but I want to hear your take.
So, like, I get the idea of like Erlina transformed into her monstrous version, servant of Eforel being the final boss is like a little bit more like personal for Zale and Valair, and like that makes sense to me in some way. But the whole like I think like the final cutscene, I'd have to pull it up and watch it again, but it's just like you defeat her, Zale and Valair basically become like the gods of the sun and the moon at that point. And Eforel's like, all right, see ya. And then that's the end. And I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it did feel a bit because I guess the implication is that you save Sarai's world, as you said, you fight Erlina in her monster form, whatever her name becomes. You fight them in the monster form. You drive out the Fleshmancer from Sarai's world specifically, and then they kind of ascend into these guardian gods who are going to go like protect the universe or something. It was very clipped. It was like, okay, well, I guess it's been building up to saving Sarai's world and saving, I guess, the first world, and then maybe they're going to go off and try saving some other worlds. Like, but yeah, it was, and then there's this weird second. You do like this little shooter section.
Oh yeah,
I think where you like, there's like a world eater coming, and you shoot it in like a little top down, which is so goofy. I was like,
yeah,
I guess is this how like our JRPG ends with like this pretty bland like top down shooter mode? It's like,
yep.
I guess it's slightly better than them just saying that they're fighting off the World Eater, but that was also really silly.
It was very silly. I didn't mind it because like I didn't want to do another big boss fight at that point either.
Right.
And then it would have been silly to also just do it as a cutscene. So I'm not mad at it. It's weird, but I'm not mad at it. But
yeah,
like,
I agree. I mean, I had enough game at that point where I wasn't like itching for like a true ending or another big section or whatever.
Right. But I wonder what the intention was in terms of like Zale and Valair and their role going forward, because I guess I could see what you were saying, like they go off to try to save other worlds, but I definitely got the sense, me personally, that like they saved these two worlds, and then they just go back and like kind of live their existence and kind of watch over the world. But like I definitely got the sense that like whatever the grand game is going on between Eforil and Rashan that I never quite fully understood is still ongoing in other places, and none of these characters will have anything to do with that outside of this one world that they've saved. It's like 1 point on the scoreboard for Rashan in this cosmic game, and like I don't know, all of that just kind of felt weird to me.
Yeah, I think for me it felt like weirdly anticlimactic because yeah, it's like you fight the second in command, Eforil just kind of disappears. He's like, this isn't worth my
He
time, and just kind of
laughs.
pieces
Yeah.
out. Yeah, and then you fly off, you do your arcade shooter segment, and then like the implication I took away was that they were going to different worlds, like doing what they could, because there's I mean, you learned this well before the ending, but it's like Rashan and Eforil are playing this eternal, like pretty literally a game, at least as far as Eforil sees it, of like, oh, how many worlds can I capture versus the worlds you save type of deal, and like just this constant struggle they've set up, which kind of comes across in like a pseudo like mythology way of like, the dwellers will always appear and it's up to people to look to their solstice warrior saviors, and like all of that stuff like is very mythologized in that way. But just kind of like very very abruptly is just like, yep, Valer and Zale are now flying around doing that, and like the game is going to continue, and it didn't really feel like it had a like much of a closure to it. I guess it was just like, all right, like you kind of did what you're going to do on this world, but the game continues, like the grander game continues in the background, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I was wondering if they were like planning for a sequel or something. I mean, with that ending, I was like, are they planning to have like a sequel or DLC or something where they kind of expand the story from here?
I would think, if not a direct sequel, I think my guess, and I have no reasoning for this, is just pure gut guess, is since the Messenger and Sea of Stars were tied in the same universe, that whatever they do next will still be in the same universe, and they can like reference this larger mythology, even if it's not like a Sea of Stars 2, but it could also be a Sea of Stars 2. I don't know. But it's just like the background for this universe, I guess.
Yeah. Right. And that's purely based on the I guess, quote unquote, not true ending or normal ending or whatever you want to call it. It sounds like there's something else going on.
So I guess we can go ahead and pivot. And really, there's not all that much different in the way it ends for the true ending. Like, it's pretty similar. The main thing that happens in the true ending is you revive Garl. Because of course you do. Yes. Which in some ways, kind of like Garl dying, I kind of saw it coming, because like I said before about Rashan with his, just infinite abilities, like he can kind of do whatever. So like that was always on the table.
Yeah.
But also, if you're going to do like a big elaborate character death like that and do it as well as they did it, like I feel like you got to stick to your guns on that. Is kind of my take there.
Did they do like a Chrono Trigger style, like go back in time and save him or something like that?
Yeah,
I should probably just let you. I'm just throwing that out there though, because I'm like, man, if that's that's probably how they would do it, right? Because Rashan is like the master of time or whatever, so he's gonna do some timey-wimey shenanigans. I guess.
No, I mean you pretty much nailed it. Rashan does his timey-wimey stuff, and like Bist ends up becoming a key part of this. So it's like he somehow, I forget the exact details, but Rashan was basically he basically put a pin or a bookmark or whatever at the moment Garl died, so that he could return to that moment. And he was able to like do some work on Bist, that Bist could take Garl's place. So they kind of like treated Bist as like a puppet, or like a puppet substitute kind of figure. So it's like you go back to that moment where Garl dies and you swap in Bist in his place, and Bist is able to like actually take the hit and survive. With whatever Rashawn did to Bist, like Rajan did something to him. I forget the exact details there. But yeah, it ends up having Bist take the hit instead, which I guess was necessary to not disrupt like the events too greatly. But yeah, you yank Garl back from that moment, and Garl's like, "Oh, you saved me, great." And then you go back to Garl's grave where he was initially buried, and Bist is there instead. But since he's whatever kind of creation he is, he's actually still alive.
The living glass or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So at that point, you actually have 6 party members that you can use in battle. You have all 6 of them.
Yeah. So then, do you get a different final boss? Is that the case?
Yeah. So you can only, the requirements to get the true ending is you have to do all of the side quests. There's like 7 or 8 different things you have to check off, but it is like do all of the personal side quests to get the ultimate weapons. You do have to like do wheels, and you have to catch all the fish, and you have to get all the conches. Like you pretty much have to do everything. But then yeah, after you and you have to do the normal ending. So you do have to do the normal ending, and then you load back up, and it's like there's like some allusion to like, oh, go to this spot, and you go there, and it's like the different lights that light up when you complete those other 7 or however many it is events. And then yeah, once you get Garl back, there's like a couple. I actually forget these details. I probably should have looked this up to remind myself, but there's like just a couple little things you have to do. You have to like, there's like a fish-shaped island at the bottom of the map, and you have to go there, and you have to get some magical item there that like allows Garl to like, it's like part of allowing all this to happen. I think this was in the prep to getting him back or something. Anyway, it's all like part of Rashawn's plan. I don't remember a lot of these details because it was a lot of like MacGuffin magic type stuff to just get all this to work. But yeah, once you get Garl back, that's when you can go to the Golden Pelican that we talked about earlier, because Garl's like, yeah, my grand wish is to to have a meal with you all, like a really fancy meal. And you actually get that ticket from the big like magic fish on the fish island. Anyway, you just do a couple little things, and then you basically go right back to the final encounter. And I don't know if you remember, in the final dungeon, there's basically a warp point from the entrance to the final boss. Like when you get to the final boss, you connect that warp back, that shortcut. So you don't even have to go back through the final dungeon. You can just use that shortcut. And instead of fighting Erlina, you fight Aforel.
Oh, okay.
But
does it imply that
after that fight, he still just leaves, right?
Yep. And that's why I said the ending actually isn't all that different, because you fight him, and the reason you fight him is you're about to fight Erlina, and then Garl like basically mocks Aforel. He's like, "Hey man, you chicken or what?"
Which is what he did the first time, which is what kind of probably got him killed.
Yeah. And then Aforel's like, I thought you were dead. He's like, no matter, I'll kill you again. And then he's like, all right, if you really want to fight me, I'll fight you. But yeah, you fight him, and it is a harder fight. Like it is, the ultimate fight. And that probably is the one fight where I used a lot of items. I cooked a lot of the ultimate item, which is basically a Final Fantasy Mega Elixir. It's full health and full MP for all party members. But yeah, you beat that fight, and then yeah, like Nate said, the ending really doesn't change that much. He's just like, all right, I'm tired of fighting, I'm gonna peace out. And then like from there, it's kind of the same deal, which is just, it felt a little silly. It felt a little needless. It's like,
I don't understand that at all.
It made it feel like that whole epilogue was really just like a Garl tribute, like of getting him back.
Yeah.
The other weird thing about the boss fight, the Aforel boss fight, is periodically through the fight multiple times you had to do the like side-scrolling shooter bit.
Oh,
It was
really?
baked into the boss fight. You had to do it every so often,
Oh wow.
which was very silly.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
kind of funny.
understand. Like, I get the impulse to have some way to save Garl in this game at the end. I don't think it's the right decision narratively. Like, you're just not going to change my mind on that. And then beyond that, to have that actually not even change anything about how like flat and weird the ending felt, like we said earlier, like to have it not meaningfully change the outcome is a really weird choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's interesting.
it again felt kind of anticlimactic in
Yeah.
a weird
I
way.
guess I was trying to compare it in my mind because if you think about, and spoilers for Chrono Trigger, warning. Um, like if you think about, and I was like, because Chrono Trigger kind of does the same thing, right? Um, in a sense, and I was like, okay, well, why does it work there and not work here? And I guess like in Chrono Trigger, right, in the main story, if you play through like one of the regular main story routes, like I think Lavo shows up like unexpectedly, maybe around Zeal, and Chrono kind of sacrifices himself to get his party members out, right? So he dies there. And one of the side quests that leads to like a better ending is you basically use time because it's Chrono Trigger, right? You use like you're able to bend time to kind of pull him out of that situation, which just sounds similar to this, but I guess this with Garl, they were the narrative like kind of leading up to, and you go on a whole adventure with him, right? Like there's a very big kind of emotional investment in his death, like, and the story is built around it. Where in a way that I feel like it's not in a game like Chrono Trigger. Plus,
Yeah.
they make it pretty clear in Sea of Stars that even though Rashawn can do some manipulation of time, like when he gives him the flask of borrowed time, Carl has to ask for it. He was basically told through a prophecy like to ask for it. So he has to ask for it, and he still will die, right? So they already had kind of pulled this like, oh, here's the time magic card we pulled out of our sleeve, but it has these restrictions on it. And then I guess this kind of circumvents that as well. There are
Yeah.
some pretty restrictive rules. It's like, okay, well, really, this gives you like a few days, and if you don't do the thing that you set out to do, you just kind of fade away. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
for sure.
that
I
is very weird.
I definitely agree that like the attention and emotional investment they put into Carl's death being such a pivotal moment in the middle of the game makes it so that it's weird to reverse that. Like if it had just been like a sudden gut punch death, it would make more sense to try to resolve that narratively. But like they resolved it narratively when it happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, like comparing to Chrono Trigger, like Chrono is a silent protagonist. Like they don't build up the same type of connection to him in the same way they do Garl and have the big fancy death scene. And like, I mean, Garl even knows he's going to die before he does. So I mean, they have a lot of time to play with that. And
Right.
and also this game's story like doesn't have as many endings as Chrono Trigger. So like they really don't play with the time stuff in like a gameplay sense all that much. Like the story is pretty linear. And then to just, yeah, I don't know. It's like it felt like they were telling a very clear arc around Garl there, and then just kind of undid it at the end for whatever reason. And yeah, I mean it does kind of mirror Chrono Trigger. You're absolutely right. But I think I agree with you that that's not what this game is. Like Chrono Trigger was about manipulating time in those ways, and this to me is a more linear character story that I think undoing the Garl death was a disservice and kind of robbed it of that impact that it did really well. All right, is there anything else we want to talk about before we wrap this up?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nate, you want to give us your final thoughts here, and we'll wrap up this podcast.
I mean, final thoughts overall. I thought this was a really cool game. I really enjoyed my time with it. It was, not without small things to complain about, but overall, I had a good time.
Ryan, what about you?
Kind of have an urge to go look up the Singing Marsh theme now that we've talked about it. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I feel like for me, it landed somewhere in like a 7 or 8 out of 10 range, which is like pretty good. Like, but it, for me, especially that first half was pretty bumpy. And it's not one that I would super highly recommend in the sense. I mean, I still enjoyed it pretty well, but I guess compared to other JRPGs which I've played, it it felt a bit more linear and that it didn't respect the player's time quite as much. But I did like the story and it had some cool moments.
Yeah. I think I'm fairly similar with you two. I like the game overall. I think it does pull on a lot of tropes from those games that in a way that I don't think it can really surpass them because it is pulling so much on those. Like I think a lot of it was pretty predictable and standard for that type of game. Like it's very clear the type of game they're going for. But I think in its execution, I think it mostly did it pretty well. Like I definitely enjoyed playing the game, even if not a lot of it was like surprising or like doing anything new or super inventive. Like I think it had a cool new touches like the locks that we talked about and that kind of stuff. And I did really like the art style and the music and a lot of that stuff. But overall, I think it was like a pretty standard, but also like pretty well made. Like I pretty much enjoyed this game from start to finish. Like we talked about some of the gripes, but like I think for the most part, yeah, it was just like a good game of that type, like well made and pretty solid. And yeah, overall I did enjoy it. Kind of similar to, it sounds like both of you kind of in that mode. Like not a perfect game by any stretch, definitely a couple of snags, but overall it was fun. And I'm definitely curious to see what comes next from Sabotage. And I'll be curious if it's a different type of game entirely. And with that, I think that's a podcast. We have just talked for almost 2 hours about Sea of Stars. I have been Flex, joined by Nate and Ryan, and this has been another episode of the ATACS Podcast. Thanks anyone for listening, and we will see you next time.